Hi YouTube. Recently I attended a funeral, and I don't often go to funerals. I've often said that I don't do funerals. And the main reason behind this is because they generally tend to be held in a church, and they come with all the attendant reading of scripture, which I'm not that much into. They also seem to be a lot more down to me, and less about the person who's deceased than it is about the religious aspects. And I much prefer the celebration of life model, where we gather together and we share stories and we talk about what we dug about the person who's passed, and we gain some closure that way and finding out some things that maybe we didn't know from other people who'd had an experience with that loved one that you weren't aware of, and that sort of thing. And I appreciate those. I'll go to those pretty much any time compared to the traditional model of a funeral. Now, this one was for a family member on my wife's side, and I didn't attend the whole thing. I mean, I told my wife, I said, literally, I just can't, but I will come to the reception afterwards. I mean, I want to show my support to the family, and I want to be there for my wife. So I ended up coming in about 3/4 of the way through the service, I guess. I went ahead and went in and sat down in the back row. And I was struck as they were saying saying a prayer. And everyone sort of bowed their head, and I was struck by the way people were nodding, and so there were a few people that were putting their hands up as they were reciting these prayers. And there were a few of us that didn't bow our heads. I was near the back, and of course I never bow my head when I'm told. I'm funny that way. And I sort of looked around, and I was really overwhelmed, I will say, with this sense that these people really got a sense of comfort from this. You could tell by the way their body language was, and a lot of them were nodding their heads and again waving their arms. And I got a sense for the comfort that this brings them. And a few things went through my head. One is that I can see that this brings people a lot of comfort, and I overheard some of them talking about it in the reception afterwards, about how their faith gives them comfort in times like this. That they've lost their dear brother. And they have this comfort in knowing that he isn't gone, he is somewhere, they'll meet him again, everything's okay. But I was also overwhelmed with the notion that that's a bad reason to choose to believe something. Now, I'm not, of course, saying that all those people chose to believe because religion just brings them comfort, but I think a lot of people do, and I think that's obviously a bad reason to form a belief. And then I was struck with the notion that, hey, there's a certain number of us in here that don't believe. There were a number of people who didn't bow their heads. I'm kind of assuming that they were probably non-believers. There may have been others who've bowed their heads out of politeness who don't believe. And so in this room, because these beliefs are opposites, some of us are wrong, right, in that room. And of course, you could expand that to the planet, right? We all believe things, one thing or another. We all have a worldview or a belief set. And because they are mutually exclusive, a lot of them, we can't all be right, but a lot of us could be wrong. And, probably most of us are wrong. Who knows? And so the question becomes, how do I determine whether or not I'm right? Now, Brett Keane uploaded a silly video where he talked about atheistic Satanism and how atheists actually worship Satan. And it's just a silly video. It really doesn't deserve a serious response. But there are some of the questions that he asks that I have seen asked by more honest Christians in the past. And so I did want to kind of address that a little bit here. He talked a little bit in there about this idea of naturalism. And I think it's kind of silly to imagine that someone who doesn't share your belief would not appeal to rationality and logic and naturalism when trying to assess something, right? I mean, we do this in every other aspect of our lives. I mean, try driving down the freeway and abandoning rationality. Things are going to end badly very quickly. And to say that we appeal to naturalism when in essence, that's the only thing that we can actually empirically verify, again, I think is a little bit silly. And to then suggest that we somehow actually believe in Satan because atheists don't talk about him much. We don't rail against Satan. Well, as I said in a recent video, first of all, Satan is not the character of record here. He's not who we're being asked to believe in and worship and follow. So it would be pointless for us to rail and make a bunch of noise against Satan. That's kind of silly. He's already been demonized in Scripture, right? We already know he's supposed to be the bad guy. Now, I want to be clear here. I'm speaking of the narrative, right? Not my own belief set. But what I find interesting is we're often presented with this idea that you're either following God or you're following Satan, almost as if they are two sides of a coin. Of course, clearly this can't be. One created the other. I'm certain that if questioned in that manner, a Christian would back away very quickly from any notions of equality amongst these characters. But it goes deeper than that, of course, because Satan gets his license from God, as do we, right? It could be no other way. You can't separate Satan from God, because to do so would be to suggest some impotence on God's part, right? If he truly is omniscient, omnipotent, has a sovereign will, has a plan, then Satan is clearly operating under his amusement. It simply can't be any other way. Now, I don't know what happens in the mind of a Christian that has chosen to believe something, and how this illogic, this problem of evil gets reconciled. It doesn't get reconciled in the rational mind of an atheist, right? It's not so much, at least speaking for myself, it's not so much that I would say I would not want to worship a God who would do this, who would allow all of this evil. It's that I cannot believe in a square circle. That's the rationality here. To me, this is akin to a square circle. A being that is all good and is all powerful and is all knowing, but allows what we would otherwise classify as evil. This is a square circle to me. Now, it could quite well be that in a Christian's mind, you can't really believe in God, in the God of the Bible, without believing that he's all good, that this is part of his declared nature, and so that somehow helps reconcile these things. But I would have to ask the question, in that case, what is all good? What does goodness even mean? Goodness then would have to be akin to God's will, whatever that is. And it could be opposing actions, so long as in the one case it fulfilled God's will, and in the other case it fulfilled God's will. So when we're asked as atheists, how do we even justify morality? Well, the one thing I think in most atheistic assessments of morality is that we tend to be consistent, certainly more consistent, I would say. Right? If I believe that rape is wrong, then I believe that rape is wrong. Now, I know I've had this argument with some of my fellow secularists here. I'm going to stick to my guns on this one. There will be no raping babies to save planets here. But it's certainly more wishy-washy in terms of Christianity. And I'm not saying this, of course, to belittle or demean any Christians out there. What I'm trying to do is paint a picture here of the square circle that exists for me when I'm trying to assess something rationally. And so this is similar to a video that I made some time ago, Sovereign Decree or Morality, One But Not Both, where I talked about a particular gang rape and how once it's occurred, could it really be considered evil? Because once it's occurred, it's clear that it is part of God's will, and could God's will be evil? And this is part of the paradox, this is part of the square circle again that forms for me that says this is not something that's worthy of my own worship or belief, right? You can't separate Satan from God. Not if he's omniscient, not if he's omnipotent, not if he has his own free will and a plan. Now, I also don't think you can separate God from Satan. In other words, to say that someone believes in Satan without believing in God means you actually aren't talking about the same thing. Right? This would be akin to saying that you believe that I am someone who makes videos on YouTube, but that I'm actually a fruit bat. You don't actually believe in me then, right? To believe in Satan, according to the narrative, you would have to believe in all of his attributes. And of course, with all the knowledge and all the painting a picture of how terrible of an entity Satan is and all the terrible things that will happen in the afterlife and how he's going to torture and torment all these souls, etc., etc., I think it's a little bit silly to then talk about how atheists are selfish and self-centered, naturalistically self-centered, and how they just make YouTube videos about hating God instead of getting jobs. Because it wouldn't be all that selfish to follow something if you really believed in the full narrative, if you really are following that Satan, to know what awaits you, right? That's not all that selfish to willingly and knowingly subject yourself to all that pain, torture, torment, and suffering. I also reject the notion that there's anything such thing as selflessness. This is a crock. You could bring me, I think, pretty much any scenario that someone does, and they're doing it for self-interest. Even charity and seeming selfless acts, they're still done for some sort of an emotional payoff to the knowledge that you're doing the right thing. This is what we'd, of course, appeal to people, to act in their own self-interest, which can be to the satisfaction of a job well done for other people, assisting other people in doing the right thing. But we're still appealing to self-interest here. So I reject anybody who's going to make any claims that they do anything selflessly and these other people do things selfishly. That's just a crock. That's just it's a way to silence people. And I don't buy it. I don't buy it for a minute. Now, the other thing, if we're being honest here, and I can only speak for myself, I've been given a narrative, and the narrative to me is internally contradictory. I'm a rational being. I have to reject it. It doesn't make sense to me. And, I can't really know, of course. Ultimately, I have no way of knowing that I'm not suppressing some truth any more than a Christian can know that they're not ultimately delusional or have led themselves to believe something for bad reasons. Because clearly, as I mentioned earlier in the video, a vast, grand number of people on this planet clearly have, just logically, led themselves to believe things that are untrue. So we know that. We know that people do that. And you can't know that any more than I can know that I'm not somehow suppressing some hidden truth. And, it's only, I think, the dishonest, such as the YouTube presuppositional apologist, who try to make some sort of an appeal to omniscience, granting them some sort of knowledge to wash that away without an acknowledgement that they still have no way of ultimately verifying this supposed omniscience, right? Without being omniscient themselves. And so, ultimately, I have to make my decisions rationally. Now, does that mean that I completely reject all notions of supernatural, or that I reject that there might be some creator? Well, no, I can't reject any and all creators because I have no idea, no way of assessing an unknown creator rationally. So I can't outright reject a creator. And I may actually prefer to believe in some sort of a creator, a truly benevolent creator, right? That may bring me some comfort. As said in many videos past, I really dislike the idea of my consciousness ending after this meat puppet shuts down. I love thinking, I love existing, I love experiencing, and I don't like the idea that it may come to an end. But the comfort of that knowledge, of that thought, is not enough for me to abandon rationality, right? I may prefer to believe that. And here, again, here's the honest part about this. There's a huge part of me that would love to believe in a benevolent creator and an afterlife, and that this is just one of many stories in an existence that's indefinite. And there are many atheists who actually believe that consciousness is eternal. That this is separate from the question of atheism for many atheists. I just simply can't choose to believe something based on comfort alone that doesn't make rational sense to me. And that's as honest as I can put it. And I understand, Brett Keane mentioned in his videos that there's lots of atheists like to band together and make Christians feel bad. Welcome to planet Earth, I guess, right? I mean, there are many groups of people who make other people feel bad. Sometimes there are groups of Christians who get together and make atheists feel bad by passing laws about things that happen that don't even concern them. And this can get people This can get people's attention. Yeah, this can make people a little militant. It would be nice if we were a little bit more live and let live, and a little bit more honest, and a little bit more approachable about our belief sets. And I think if that, then we can coexist, right? The problem that I see here with coexisting is the dictates and the dogma of certain religions don't allow for that. And so the only people who follow those religions quite often who are willing to coexist are actually not really following the dictates of their religion. And so, they're subject to ridicule by Westboro Baptist Church and other hardline groups. If you're an Islamist or something like that, you've got hardline groups who are going to be railing against you for that. So anyway, I just wanted to say, for me anyway, it's not about trying to tell somebody else what they should believe. As long as you don't try to impose your beliefs on my life without a rational empirical basis for it, right? If we're going to start making laws in the public space, they need to have rational, empirically verifiable reasoning behind it. And as long as you're not doing that, I'm happy to let you keep Christ in Christmas and have your Christmas tree and your nativity scenes and do everything else that you do. I'm quite happy with that, so long as you don't discriminate against me because I don't share your belief set, and don't demonize me. Heck, I don't even have very much black in my wardrobe. Go figure. Thanks for watching.